Are we all ready now for the CFO Insider track, which is sponsored by Pollen VC, and we've got the wonderful Martin Macmillan from Pollen, who I've just been wittering away with, chatting about meeting all of you in person for the first time in such a long time, and it's very exciting, as will be Martin's talk about how to build a scale-up financial model. So I'll just pass on to him very quickly.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Jackie. Yeah, it's nice to be back in person, right? So we're going to talk about. I'll just check everything's working. You probably got it from the show reel a second ago, but just to give you a little intro to Pollen, what we do and who we do it for. So a key thing and why we do sessions like this is around improving the financial literacy of gaming studios. So gaming studios typically don't have anyone with their hands on the finances until way later, for some reason, than excuse me, most other businesses. As a company, what we do is we provide revolving credit facilities to game developers, primarily so when they've figured out user acquisition, you can use these revolving credit facilities to fund the user acquisition, or most of it, to then scale up in a much more efficient way. So typically it's used as part of the capital mix alongside venture capital, to just grow in a much more efficient way, and from founder's point of view, less dilutive and keep more control. So one of the things we see as a company the whole time is this idea of soft launch, and then bang, there's a cut the ribbon moment, right, we're ready to scale. And obviously, some people are able to scale very successfully, some people aren't. So what we thought we'd do is to talk about, some of the pre-flight checks and so on that we see are sort of best practice, and then talk about how to actually build the financial model to have some framework to actually scale a game. So first of all, number one, ahead of anything else, has got to be very clearly understood metrics. You've got to have a really good sense of acquisition costs. Obviously, you're not going to know how the acquisition cost is going to scale up as you scale up, but you should at least plan for it. ROAS break even, the day that you're able to break even on your ad spend, is super important. And then also the ultimate LTV and how long you measure the ultimate LTV over. Super important to have an MMP wired in. So however it's possible to track or approximate all of the attribution in today's world, but it's really important to look at things on a cohorted basis. So the MMPs provide very good data to allow you to look back at sort of existing performance of cohorts. Sufficient retention data to model longer term LTV scenarios. So if you were basically on, if you think your LTV is going to be a year or 18 months or 2 years, how much data do you really need to project that far out? Now, in a way, you need sufficient retention data to have a sensible estimate, but if you overshoot these estimates, you could find that you're buying users unprofitably, and that could kind of really screw the business early on. 4 kind of sounds obvious, like where are you, where do you want to get to? Most people we talk to say, hey, I'm spending 1,000 a day and I want to get to 50,000 a day spend, or 10,000 to 100. But it's this idea of this is working here, and now we want to ramp up, and we want to see what happens to the economics when we start to scale. And then lastly, we talked a little bit about cohorts. The number of people we still find that say, well, I'm making this much a day and I'm spending this much a day, therefore it's all good, who are not looking at it back on the cohort behavior. And so the propensity to make if you don't look through the numbers into the cohort data, again, propensity to lose money. So when you're actually building the financial model, and if you have a finance lead, or you're doing it yourselves as founders or whoever, or the UA team, here's a few sort of key ingredients. So obviously, you need to understand your acquisition costs and model how these are going to move over time. You need to have a pretty robust ROAS and LTV model, and that is normally going to be done sort of by country. You don't just look at one blended curve. You're going to have to go fairly granular on it. The payment terms. So often we see with UA managers, they're just totally focused on a P&L metric, and they're not thinking about cash. So from a cash flow perspective, you could be waiting anything from 15 days from the end of the month for some of the fastest paying ad networks. And you've got the app stores in the middle, right up to 90 days. So you need to think, if you're building a financial model, you need to care about when you're actually getting paid. You need to try and put in place credit facilities with the ad networks. So once you get to a level of spend, they'll typically come and offer credit facilities, which you should take and you should max out for as long as your UA is working, because a credit facility from an ad network is effectively a risk transfer of LTV recovery onto you, from you onto them. So you should max it out whenever available, provided your UA is working. Your starting cash and studio running costs. You see a few different camps here. One of the ways we like to look at it is just like in a clean room scenario. So my studio running costs and my offices and so on, that's all over here. That's well known and well understood and pretty predictable. But what we like to see is clean room economics, where you actually have a separate bank account just for running user acquisition, monetization. So you can then see the cash washing around that system without being clouded by payrolls and other things that sort of take you off. Obviously, from a CFO's point of view, you need to look at the whole thing, but we like the idea of clean room economics for user acquisition and monetization. You need to be able to build these models. They're kind of non-trivial to build, and most people hitting the ground as a CFO will spend weeks and then months and then years refining, and then suddenly you get to a model that kind of really works through your business. Unfortunately, there's not an off-the-shelf one of these, but something we as a company do is we often help people build, and once they get to a certain level of scale, we can go very, very deep and build very granular models. And lastly, ambition, right? The last thing you want to do is be so cautious about it that if you say, well, if I'm breaking even in 9 months and I need 2 years to figure out what the LTV looks like, you don't have 2 years to go through a whole LTV cycle because someone's come in, copied your game, or the world has moved. So it's a combination of not being unambitious about it. So as finance guys, the way we think about user acquisition is just as an investment formula. How much in? When do I break even? How much out? And then to calculate and tabulate some of these sort of financial returns. So obviously the first thing we want to do is it calculates, have you got a UA machine? Can I put money in and get more money out the other side with known kind of economics in terms of how long the time frame is going to take? So the first thing we really care about, and makes a massive difference, is when do we break even? So if you're hyper casual and you break even in 3 or 4 or 5 days, it's a totally different model to like a merge game, which is going to break even in 9 to 12 months. So that sort of lily pad, that landing pod of basically, right, I'm break even, anything else is now just profit, sets a really different tone in terms of how to build the models. So if we look at it, if we build up our investment formula, and we just have a really simple formula here. So this is $1 invested, gives me my $1 back after 120 days, goes on to make $2 total LTV within 1 year. So my profit on that is $1. And what we often do is we work with people to break that sort of profit over the length of the entire LTV cycle back down into a monthly return on capital. So if I take that return, I'm going to say it's basically an 8.3% monthly return. We're trying to get to an investment equation that says on a monthly basis, we can repeatably invest capital and generate an 8% return, which is pretty good. Again, one of the things we have invested a lot of time and effort as a company is helping people understand these metrics. So we've created a whole suite of financial modeling tools that are just there. There may be an email, but it's not even verified. It's pretty much ungated, just a free set of financial tools as a sandbox environment to help you figure out these economics. So we never ask you to sync up your data sources. We just want it used, and it's used, thousands of hits a month coming with people just modeling their metrics. And what we're trying to do on this one, I won't go into it in this talk, but I'll leave it to if you want, just on Pollen.vc, it's the calculator section at the top. So this one is about ROAS, LTV, and Cashflow. And what we're trying to do just in this front slide here is model out, what does my journey of LTV curve look like, and pick out the points where I break even, I cut off my LTV. There's no point in measuring LTV if it's really, really flat. So knowing when to cut it off and then visualizing what my profit and timing is there. So this is something we continue to invest in. So the next thing to put into your model is when are you actually getting paid? Because if you've got your hands on the rudder of the purse strings, you want to know when. So if you think about, like, say, the month of January, and you're either you're serving IAPs or you're serving ads, there's a whole spectrum of when you actually get paid for this. So at the shortest end, you've got people like AppLovin paying out 15 days from the end of the monthly cycle, right up to some of the other networks, Unities and Vungles and Iron Sources, whose standard payment terms are 60 days later. So you've got to factor in up to 90 days of spending and monetizing, but not actually seeing the cash. So there's your first thing to build into your model in terms of offsets. And then the next thing is, obviously, in terms of ad network credit facilities, you start on credit cards, you start to build up, you get an account manager. It's a very sort of like a step-by-step basis. But as soon as, if you're in a scale-up phase and you have a credit facility, you should be wanting to max this out, because, as I said, it's just a risk transfer from you onto them. And again, typically the way it works, let's say you've got January's bill is due at the end of February. So again, that needs to be also sort of factored in, offset into your financial models. Now, the thing I really want to get across is that even when you've got credit facilities here, what you need to be thinking of is the ROAS profile and the LTV profile of the game versus when the bills need to be paid, because some of this is going to determine how much external capital you need in order to actually to get there. So again, fictitious example here, there's my revenue being earned on a P&L basis. I have a 100K credit limit, and then it's basically maxed out. So then I'm looking at when I need to pay the bill. So if I need to pay the bill for that, it appears on a P&L basis, I've got enough to pay it, but on a cash basis, not the case. So what this is showing is basically if you're able to, to draw cash against it and to reinvest, and then when you actually get paid by the platform. So you need to overlay all of these things together and figure out cash, P&L, ROAS, when the bills need to be paid, etc. The key thing is, like, the longer it takes you to recover, the more external capital you need to fund the game. So take, for example, go back to like a merge game with a 9-month break even and then a 2-year LTV. If I want to, I think this game is like working, I want to scale it from, 10 or 20,000 a day up to 100,000 a day. So if I want to spend 100,000 a day on that merge game, that's going to break even in 9 months' time, I'm going to need $27 million of capital before that first cohort is even broken even in September. So think about that in terms of, and that's why you see so much kind of venture money going into fuel, scaling of UA games if it's just being funded in equity. So if you're talking hyper casual, it's 3 days, money can wash around the system super quickly. But when you've got these long dated LTVs, whether it's social casino, puzzle, all of these categories that the horizons are longer, if you want to scale up, then one of the things we do is we show you how cash negative you would go in order to achieve your level of spend. But if the user acquisition is working, then you should want to do it. You just need to factor in the different models of how you finance it. So here's some stuff we've seen. Again, we've been doing this for a long time. So, what can go wrong? Maxing out of credit lines. If you get up there and you can't get extensions, whatever, all of your campaigns get dropped. You then have to figure out how to juggle cash to pay down the credit line, et cetera, and then start up the campaigns again. It's really, really bad for all of the algorithms. You lose a ton of time, and it throws your UA modeling off. Manage cash. So this is back to the kind of the clean room economics of just like, I've got the user acquisition monetization completely separate on a bank account basis, so I can see how much in and out without polluting the rest of the studio's economics there. Now, the key thing, and this is where it's always best. The best outcomes are where UA managers figure out stuff with the finance team and ideally the monetization team. So if everyone sits in their silo, just looking at their own KPIs on a P&L basis, the thinking is very disjointed. When everyone kind of works together and figures out, if we've got this user acquisition machine, how can we scale it? Then that's when the best outcome happens, whenever it becomes everyone's circular problem. So managing cash is a really important thing. planning for sufficient financing. So what is your model telling you and how are you going to finance it? Do you need $27 million to scale your merge game? Maybe not. Maybe there's other ways. And then lastly, don't fall. This is not set and forget. So I think everyone in this room knows these metrics have to be modeled. They're going to change around, chop and change every day. This was really interesting. So this was just picked up. This is just from the press. I don't have any kind of particular insights, but interesting that Metacore had raised something in the region of I think $22 million of equity that is pulled from Crunchbase, and then saw this headline, which is great. So you've got a game which has obviously got long LTV, long recovery period, but they've got a mismatch, right? It's very capital intensive to build this sort of game. So obviously then they take their investors at Supercell gave them a credit facility. They didn't chuck in 180 million of equity. So that's how they saw to mismatch it, which I thought was super smart. In terms of how you can finance this gap then, I mean, the lazy way to do it is just go and raise equity because it's dilutive, it's really expensive, etc. But then there's different ones. So there's venture debt, which is term loans. There's revenue-based loans, which is loans that you're expected then to put into user acquisition return for a revenue share. You can go to a bank for a credit facility. Typically, it's pretty rigid. They don't really understand this world. You can go to a publisher and give away 50, 60% of your revenue simply because you don't have enough cash to scale UA. Or you can do non-bank revolving credit. So like us and there are a couple of people in the same space provide these sorts of facilities that are tailored exactly for this world. It should be a really dispassionate process in terms of you start off with your cheapest source of capital and you go through this capital stack until and you keep spending until the unit economics don't work. So you've got your credit lines, free cash sitting in the bank. Some people still use credit cards for the air miles, credit lines, loans against future revenues, and then right at the bottom of the stack, VC funding. So at some point, as you go through that, the economics of acquisition will stop working, and that's where you pull back and stop. So last thing is like knowing when your machine is running at full capacity. So this, compared to the other ones, a fairly gopping looking slide, but the point of pulling this up is basically to show, so once you've got the core economics done, what we typically do is we work with the studio to say, like, figure out, go much more granular, figure out all of these things and build. Unfortunately, this doesn't exist as a nice, pretty website calculator, but we spend a lot of time modeling these things and we show the different scenarios. This is, if you fund the whole thing in equity, if you fund the whole, how much can you do with debt and compare all the different debt products together? So it's really about building models that help you make informed decisions to keep your scaling path on track. Last one here, I'm going to zip through X amount of time. Definitely helps to have a CFO with relevant gaming experience. Building these models is not traditional for a kind of CFO function. Think about capital efficiency. Make sure you are using the right form of capital within the business for the right risk profile of project. Do care about dilution. Right now we're in a super frothy market, but if the market turns, founders who are raising, X amount of venture capital, are going to be on the wrong side of liquidity preference. Think about your capital mix and potentially raise less equity and more debt to achieve the same results. That was it from me. I've gone a minute or so over. I don't know if we've got any time for questions.
Quick questions. Thank you.